Hello, my dear viewers. Today I'm going to start with a dance. Can you guess what the maracas symbolize? Today they will symbolize wounded self-esteem. We need to learn to recognize this sound. Welcome, I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. And just a little more, I'm dancing. Today we will talk about wounded self-esteem, and we need to learn to recognize its sound and its taste. What does it sound like? Our personality as a whole is in conflict with reality. It is used to living inside its own world, and when it comes into contact with the outside world, it experiences conflict. Many people, because they cannot accept this fundamental conflict with external reality, come up with certain explanatory constructs that explain nothing and only make things even more confusing. These are the very moments when we wake up, enter this reality, or leave the house. We step out of our own reality and go into someone else's. Or we arrive somewhere and we enter someone else's reality. We enter someone else's home, someone else's restaurant, and it becomes unbearable for us to be in this unfamiliar space, so we start to fill it with ourselves. This is our awakening. It is the moment of entering into conflict with reality. And by how easy or difficult it is for you to wake up, you can understand what kind of relationship you have with reality. And these relationships can be different. Sometimes it is easier for us to wake up, sometimes it is harder, sometimes the reality we live in suits us more, sometimes less. But we respond to all of this precisely with our wounded pride. That is, when our reality encounters the actual world, it resonates with this pain, with this wounded self-esteem. When people talk about wounded self-esteem, they often attach a vague meaning to these words, self-esteem. In fact, it is about a world that loves me. And if external reality is resistant to us, does not meet us with joy or open arms, we begin to hear this rattling sound of wounded self-esteem within us. Let me give you some examples, and you try to feel it, or rather to remember it. These sensations arise somewhere deep in the unconscious, and we are not used to explaining them this way. For example, when someone disagrees with you, a person says, "I don't agree." And at that moment, our signaling system responds with that very sound. In other words, there is a mismatch. For instance, when you come to the bank and there is a line, but you had set aside a specific amount of time for your visit. In this case, your self-esteem will also be affected. A significant mismatch, a noticeable discrepancy. And through this particular mismatch, we can either truly understand our fundamental underlying need, or unfortunately get caught up in false, misleading lines of reasoning. For example, thinking that this world is wrong. In order to preserve the world as we see it, the simplest conclusion is that the world is wrong, not the way it should be. And if you look deeply inside a person, you can see a lot of this. A lot of this judgment that the world is wrong. In fact, a person unconsciously and constantly tries to make the external reality match their expectations with how they would like things to be, and these two are constantly at odds. And then a person says, "This world is wrong. It's not the way it should be." If you observe yourself, when you're just walking down the street and looking at other people, it's actually quite difficult to see things outside of your own world. That is, to see people as individuals who don't live in my world, but live their own lives. Instead, I immediately start comparing them to my own ideas within my world. And my self-esteem, it will signal to me that there is something wrong with these people. And the more a person has an imagined image that doesn't match reality, the more often they will hear this sound of wounded self-esteem. In other words, my imagined image seems almost unviable. This reality doesn't suit it because I live in something imagined, in an image and a reality of my own invention. And because of this, I will constantly feel excessive, ongoing emotional pain, our wounded self-esteem. In other words, this mismatch, this lack of alignment. It will almost always manifest itself as either a powerful desire to lash out aggressively at reality, or to simply cry profusely because of it. Let me give you a simple example. For instance, when a person boards a plane or a long-distance bus traveling to another city or flying to another country, their attitude toward the people already seated is indifferent, unconcerned. But as soon as I approach the seat indicated on my ticket and someone is sitting there, at that moment my internal alarm goes off, because in my own frame of reference, in my worldview, I was simply walking to and sitting in the seat assigned to me according to my ticket. And this mismatch will constantly create the feeling that the world is attacking me, although in reality it's just a discrepancy between how I imagine things would be. Imagine someone sitting in your seat and you say, "Isn't this my seat?" And they reply, "No, this is my seat." And inside, you feel this urge to cry, to show your pain, to express, "Look how much you're hurting me," or to respond with aggression. In fact, both of these reactions are aimed at correcting the situation. This situation, according to how things are in my world, in the world I've imagined, and is actually quite difficult for a person to call what they have in their mind an imagined world. They say, "This is the right world, this is a just world, this is how it should be." In other words, the person seems not to. A person separates their own worldview from some kind of universality. As soon as the I appears, and as soon as a person says, "This is how I imagined it, this is how I would like it to be, this is what I think," a dividing line emerges for them, separating external reality from themselves. But not everyone is able to think this way. A person lives in an imagined bubble, and they extend the space of this imagined bubble to encompass the entire universe. That is, it's as if they don't notice that these are their personal judgments, and these judgments begin to take on a universal character. And this mismatch between some supposed universality and my own subjectivity will always be felt as something painful. Self-esteem, for example, if someone congratulates you on your birthday, but does so in a way that you don't like, in that moment your self-esteem will be hurt. In other words, we encounter this mismatch. If someone forgets to congratulate me, my self-esteem is wounded, especially if that person is part of my system. In my coordinates, in my imagined world, they are supposed to congratulate me. If someone congratulates you but doesn't use the words you would have liked, or wishes you something inappropriate, this signaling system will react in the same way and make you feel that the person wished you something meaningless. Something meaningless. So you see, when I perform this act of devaluation, even if external reality doesn't match my own, I sort of bring it to the same level. In my mind, I'm constantly completing this puzzle. But the right way would be like this. The right way to look would be like this. The right way to treat me would be like this. The right thing to say to me would be this. And by filling in these gaps, it's as if I'm constantly keeping my imagined world consistent. That is, it doesn't change, it isn't reconsidered. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the more imagined the image, the more costly it is to maintain. That is, if my perception doesn't match reality, I constantly have to work as if I'm mining in a quarry. I'm constantly occupied with this, with correcting reality to fit the reality I have in my mind. Of course, the main character of the imagined world is the imagined self. It is in fact maintained by the personality. And this imagined self, why is it imagined? Because it is chaotically complex. A person rarely reflects on what their view of the universe is, of the world, of themselves, or of their loved ones. In other words, it is assembled in a somewhat chaotic way, glued together, a kind of dummy that just lies there, and a person neither double-checks it nor rewrites it. But in those moments when there is a clear mismatch, we will feel this pain. This pain is always an attack from within. So if someone disagrees with me, I will perceive it as wounded self-esteem. But people rarely have enough awareness to realize that this sting is not external, but internal. It's as if someone is poking us in the side and signaling some kind of danger. And this signal comes entirely from our physiological side. For example, if I were to go to the local bank, I would typically have a certain predetermined amount of time I had planned to spend there, but the reality often doesn't quite match that expectation. At that moment, I will feel as if my carefully constructed world is collapsing around me. The picture I had lived within and was heading towards has completely fallen apart. It's gone. It's that feeling of the ground slipping away from under your feet. This is what happens when our self-image collapses, when at the same time it's as if the entire external reality collapses as well. It's that feeling. The ground has disappeared from under your feet, and then the instinct for self-preservation will react as if there is danger. In fact, our instinct for self-preservation is like a beast living inside us. And it wants the one who serves this beast, the host, to be adequate and to analyze reality. Correctly, that is without mistakes, flawlessly. That's why mistakes are so frightening to us, because if there is no analytical thinking, no understanding of causes, a person finds themselves in a kind of panic. They don't understand how it happened. And this is the reaction of a wounded ego. Constantly pointing out one's own flaws is dangerous because by causing themselves pain and highlighting this gap in their worldview, a person fails to analyze the underlying cause. So, in fact, if I receive congratulations from people that are not what I expected, it means that I am unable to be in a state where I can accept congratulations from people that are not what I expected. What do these people hold inside themselves? If I have mistakenly recorded something about them, I need to reconsider my perception of them. If I realize that I am not keeping up, it means that my planning is flawed. If another person behaves in a way that does not meet my expectations, then I need to pause and reconsider my perception of this person. But for many people, this process takes too long, and they prefer simply dissatisfaction. A person feels exactly the same dissatisfaction toward themselves. That is, instead of analytically and deeply examining their own worldview or self-image, a person responds with dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction with others, dissatisfaction with themselves. And this autoaggression is the same dissatisfaction. So, if my self-esteem is wounded, I can quickly fix everything with dissatisfaction. It turns out that it's as if I'm on a cloud where I know what's right, and I am dissatisfied with myself. That is, I don't analyze or reconstruct my worldview. Instead, I use this dissatisfaction to adjust things to what I want. And people often think that expressing dissatisfaction to someone will fix the other person. That is, a person, without explaining anything, is simply dissatisfied. This imagined image is constantly hungry, and it constantly demands to be fed, constantly requiring the world to be distorted for its sake. Now let's look at wounded self-esteem from another perspective. what do we feel when we're around someone with wounded self-esteem? First of all, you get the feeling that you have to behave as if you're walking on a tightrope. In other words, this person is constantly reacting and showing you that you're not behaving the way you should. And this person might even consider themselves to be very sensitive. That is, by reacting with pain to your behavior, you feel it physically, unconsciously, as if you're being forced into a narrow corridor of acceptable actions. Let's also talk about wounded self-esteem. It's important to understand that when someone has an overly fabricated self-image, they maintain it through questionable means. These are the unhealthy ways of boosting one's self-esteem. For example, when we devalue others or focus on their flaws. So, as someone who feeds on meaning, I constantly have to maintain my invented image, which is placed on some kind of pedestal of value. And if I am unproductive, meaning if I can't do anything valuable outwardly, then I will maintain this image by using these unhealthy ways of devaluing others. And devaluation is something we see a lot of. If you look closely, it's everywhere. And when you're around someone who doesn't live true to themselves, to their real self-image, you constantly feel as if they're draining your sense of value. You might not understand what it is, but you'll have the feeling that your value is being drained from you. This person will say things that seem to hurt you again and again. It's a way of boosting their own self-esteem. Or they might say a lot of things that are devaluing. And inside a person, this can create a kind of hole, an insatiable pit where they keep drinking in value over and over, but can never get enough. They can never feel satisfied. So let's return to that feeling of a breach in your side, to the sense of wounded self-esteem. All these small moments, these little stings to your pride, actually give a person a chance. In other words, in each of these moments, a person can reconsider their worldview, rethink their perception of themselves and others, and change. So this moment, the collapse of my imagined self-image. But it's unbearable for us to feel this because it's a long and difficult process, a process of re-evaluation. And so it's as if I choose simply to feel dissatisfied. Dissatisfied either with myself or with someone else. And this is a breach that has formed through which transformation could have occurred, but I patch it up with my dissatisfaction, aggression, or self-aggression. And so I remain the same as before. That is, the structure of my personality does not change. My perception of myself and of the world is not reconsidered. Try to describe wounded self-esteem, the sharp stings of wounded self-esteem, and catch that moment when your imagined self does not truly match the reality of the situation. And try to describe how you would need to change your worldview and your self-perception in order to free yourself from this pain, not by forgetting about it, nor by being dissatisfied with yourself or others, but specifically by re-examining your view of the world. I'm going to give a lecture on emotions. Actually, 2 lectures which will be free for everyone. This will be my gift to all my viewers. Today, I wanted to talk with you about self-esteem because we encounter it every day, and every day it gives us a chance for transformation if we don't miss it. Please write your comments. Perhaps someone will even describe the kind of analysis I suggested, where we analyze and reconsider, rather than react with dissatisfaction. And I invite you to subscribe to the channel and to like the video. Thank you for your support and your reflections. It means a lot. You can visit the website, Olga Demchuk. I also remind you that there are also videos for sponsors. They are released every Tuesday. And I also invite you to the Patreon channel. We have launched on Patreon. For now, the content there is the same as on YouTube, but perhaps it will be more convenient for some of you. And there is also a Telegram channel where I share insights. But these products are currently only available in Russian. I say goodbye to you. See you soon.